The night looked expensive before anyone even stepped inside the Hyun Grand Ballroom. You could feel the money in the air. Not real elegance, just the rented kind that shines loud enough to convince people they're in the presence of power. Crystal chandeliers burned a little too bright, white tablecloth stretched stiff like plastic, and perfume hung so heavy it almost felt like you could sip it. Everyone walked in wearing the same expression, "Tonight is my moment," even though most of them were praying someone important would notice them. Jamal Rivers stepped through the doors at 8:12 p.m., unnoticed, invisible by design. He wasn't the type who needed the room to look at him. He preferred when they didn't. Navy suit, neat fade, simple watch, relaxed walk. The kind of confidence that stays quiet. The kind that doesn't need to shout to be felt. But in a room full of loud egos, quiet was the same as invisible. He didn't make it 10 steps before the first sting of judgment hit. A tall security guard with stiff posture raised a hand like he was stopping a delivery guy. "Sir, are you with catering?" The tone wasn't rude or polite, just that lazy assumption people use when they think they've correctly placed you in the hierarchy. Jamal didn't break stride. He reached into his jacket and lifted a matte black invitation with a silver seal. The guard's face cracked, embarrassment slipping through before he tried to hide it. Jamal walked past him without a smirk. He didn't need it. Inside, the same quiet dismissals followed him. Two women in sequins glanced at him, then shifted their clutches to the other side like they were guarding their space. A man in a tux cut in front of him at the bar and muttered, "Staff first, right?" before laughing at his own joke. Jamal stepped aside calmly and ordered water. Not champagne, not wine, not the $600 0 cents bottle people pretended to enjoy. Water. It made everyone around him uneasy. They had no category for a man who didn't behave the way they expected. On every screen, the Hale Quantum Systems logo spun in blue and white. Their $800 million 0 cents partnership with a mystery investor was the only topic tonight. Guests bragged as if they personally negotiated the deal. Staff whispered about it in the hallway. Influencers positioned themselves where photographers might accidentally catch them in the background of an important shot. The entire room felt like it was trying to impress itself. What they didn't know, what not a single person guessed, was that the man behind the entire deal, the one funding the $800 million 0 cents contract they were celebrating, was standing 20 feet away, leaning against a white column with his hands in his pockets. He preferred it that way. Jamal took in the scene like a man studying a puzzle he already knew the answer to. The crystal lights scattered across jewelry and polished shoes. The orchestra played something classical that no one listened to, except for how expensive it made them feel. The air carried steak, wine, linen, and expensive scent. Cameras flashed, phones recorded. Everyone wanted proof they belonged here. Everyone was performing. Jamal was observing. On stage, the host tapped the microphone and waited for the room to quiet, though it never fully did. It just shifted into a controlled hum. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Hale Quantum Systems Gala." Applause rose like a reflex. Jamal didn't clap. He watched, breathing slow, calm, steady, like a man who already knew the night would end very differently than anyone imagined. Then Vanessa Hale walked out, full dress shimmering like it caught every light in the building. Chin lifted, smile perfect, she waved as if the room were built just to witness her. Behind her came her husband, Richard Hale, sharp suit, sharper ego, face full of practiced charm. Cameras turned, guests straightened, and the room tried to adjust itself around their presence. Everyone watched them, everyone except Jamal. He remained by the column, expression unreadable, posture controlled, still invisible, still underestimated. But then Vanessa's eyes found him. Her stare lingered too long. A slow, deliberate smirk crept onto her face, the kind of smirk someone gives when they think they've found something beneath them. She leaned into Richard, whispered something in his ear that made his eyebrows harden. Richard turned toward Jamal with the look of a man who believed the room belonged to him, and was irritated that someone he didn't recognize dared to stand comfortably inside it. That moment, small as it was, became the spark that lit everything else on fire. Richard stepped off the stage with that controlled confidence rich men rehearse in mirrors, the kind that says, "I own this room," even when they're barely holding it together. His smile looked polite from a distance, but up close it was tight, thin, irritated. He moved through the crowd like he expected people to step aside before he reached them. Most did. Jamal didn't. Richard stopped a foot away and tapped Jamal's sleeve with two fingers like he was checking the fabric for authenticity. Sir, are you supposed to be standing here? His tone was coated in condescension. Soft, but heavy. Intentional. It was the voice of a man who believed everyone had a place, and Jamal had wandered out of his. Jamal didn't move, didn't step back, didn't blink. I'm fine here, he said simply, steady and quiet, just observing. The calm in his voice made Richard's smile crack for half a second. People like him hated calm from anyone they were trying to belittle. Observing, Richard repeated with a small laugh, like it tasted wrong. He snapped his fingers at a passing server. Get him a towel or something. Looks like he's sweating through that budget suit. A few guests pretended not to stare while leaning in just enough to hear. Someone whispered, "Who let him into VIP?" Another murmured, "Staff entrance is on the other side." Jamal kept his posture steady. He didn't correct them. He didn't defend himself. He didn't explain who he was, because if the night unfolded the way he expected, explaining would be unnecessary. Then Vanessa approached. Her gold dress shimmered with every step, heels clicking like punctuation marks. She lifted a glass of red wine from a server's tray without turning to look, focusing only on Jamal. Her eyes ran over him in one long sweep. Not curious, evaluating. You know, sweetie, she said softly, if you needed work tonight, you could have signed up. Pretending to be a guest isn't the move. The patronizing sweetness in her voice floated across the room. A few nearby guests smirked behind their champagne flutes. Jamal's silence unsettled her. She stepped closer and raised the glass toward his chest. Go take this to table 3. They've been waiting. When he didn't reach for it, her smile faltered. Seriously, she said, annoyance creeping in. Do your job. The tone finally exposed her. The entitlement, the casual cruelty she never apologized for because she never needed to. Richard reached out, plucked the glass from her hand, and lifted it high enough for onlookers to catch the moment. Allow me, he announced. People turned, phones rose, a few chuckled, expecting a harmless joke. One less confused worker ruining the vibe. Richard tilted the glass. The wine fell like a dark curtain, splashing across Jamal's chest, sliding down his collar, dripping off his sleeve. The room gasped in one collective breath. The sound was sharp, immediate, electric. Someone whispered, "Damn, he really did that." So another lifted their phone higher, recording. Vanessa's lips curved. Maybe now he knows where he stands. Jamal wiped his jaw slowly with two fingers. Controlled, deliberate, not angry. Something colder. He straightened his sleeve, adjusted his posture, and walked away with zero emotion in his face. No yelling, no scene, no reaction. Just silence. And that silence scared them more than any outburst would have. A server, watching him pass, whispered, "That man walked out like he owned the place." Nobody believed it. But the hallway outside the ballroom felt cooler as Jamal walked through it. His shoes pressed softly against the carpet, leaving faint impressions. The wine stain had already begun to dry, darkening the fabric. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and tapped a single number. A voice answered instantly. "Ready for instructions, sir." Jamal spoke calmly. "Pull the offer. Lock every channel. Announce it now." Understood. He ended the call. A couple waiting near the elevator noticed him. The woman murmured, "That's the guy they drenched." The man watched the way Jamal carried himself and whispered, "Nobody walks away like that unless there's somebody." Jamal pressed the elevator button with a gentle touch. He didn't need revenge speeches. He didn't need to shout or throw threats into the room behind him. He only needed one phone call, and the world inside that ballroom was about to crack open. When the elevator doors opened, he stepped in, loosened his tie slightly, and let the soft hum of the descending car clear the last traces of the evening's noise. While he moved down, the first aftershock hit upstairs. Music cut, screens flickered, phones buzzed, and panic began to spread before anyone even realized he hadn't just walked out. He'd pulled the floor out from beneath them. Inside the ballroom, everything collapsed at once. The music stopped mid-note as if someone had yanked the cord from the wall. The spinning corporate logo on the screens froze, glitched, and then blinked out entirely. Conversations stumbled into silence. The entire room shifted from rehearsed glamour to raw confusion in a heartbeat. People turned toward the stage, waiting for someone to explain what was happening. The host looked lost. His smile stayed frozen for a moment too long, stretched into discomfort. A tall man in a gray suit rushed across the tables, phone pressed tight to his ear. His face twisted from confusion to alarm in real time, like someone tightening a rope around his thoughts with every step he took. He leaned into the host, whispering something sharp. The host's fake smile dropped instantly. Whatever he heard, it rattled him. The microphone trembled in his hand as he tried to hide the panic rising in his throat. Richard was the first to notice the shift. "What's going on?" he demanded. His voice carried across the room. Heads turned toward him, waiting for reassurance. That never came. The host swallowed hard. "The signing is suspended." A wave of shock crashed through the room. Gasps, sharp whispers, disbelief hitting in layers. "Suspended," someone repeated loud enough for half the tables to hear. "That's impossible," a woman muttered to her partner. "You don't freeze an $800 million 0 cents deal in the middle of a gala." Her partner stared at his phone, eyes widening as new alerts flashed. Vanessa took a slow breath, trying to maintain poise, but her chest rose too quickly, giving her away. "Who gave that order?" she asked, voice tight. The host looked at her with the expression of a man who wished he could disappear under the tablecloth. "It came from the top." The partner said the directive was final. Richard snapped, "I am the top." The host shook his head gently, almost apologetically. "Not tonight." Executives began checking their phones. Alerts stacked like falling dominoes. Someone stood up and shouted, "Every account tied to Hale Quantum just got frozen." Another voice chimed in, "Investors are pulling out. My screen is red." A pocket of panic grew near the back of the room as people began to realize this wasn't a glitch, this was an earthquake, and they were standing at the epicenter. Then it happened, the shift they couldn't undo. Someone near the doors tapped their friend and whispered, "Look at this." The friend leaned closer, phone glowing beneath their face. Their mouth fell open. "Wait, isn't that the guy they poured wine on?" A video played on the phone. Richard's hand lifting the glass. Wine falling. Jamal standing still, unbothered. Vanessa smirking. The caption read, "They humiliated the man they thought was staff." And beneath it, someone had added, "He walked out like he owned the place." The clip spread through the ballroom faster than sound. Screens lit up, faces in red and white. People watched in horror, replayed it, zoomed in, passed it to the person next to them. Gasps turned into stunned silence. Some covered their mouths, some lowered their eyes. A few whispered prayers that they hadn't laughed earlier. Vanessa grabbed Richard's arm, her voice cracking. Fix it right now." Richard snapped back, voice rising, "I don't even know what broke." A board member rushed toward them, face flushed, sweat beading on his forehead. "This is catastrophic," he hissed. "Do you know who you offended?" Richard barked, "I offended no one." The board member looked at him like he couldn't believe the stupidity he was hearing. "You offended the man who funded this deal." Richard's expression collapsed. "Who?" His voice didn't sound like a leader anymore. It sounded like a man begging for the world to make sense again. The board member whispered one name like a blade sliding across marble. "Jamal Rivers." Vanessa's breath hitched. The gold in her dress suddenly felt too heavy, like her body was sinking into the floor. No, that's not possible," she whispered. But the truth didn't care about her disbelief. "It owns the partner company," the board member said. "All of it." A shockwave rolled across the ballroom. People froze mid-step. Servers stopped moving. Phones lowered slowly, like they couldn't bear to drop the moment too fast. Someone whispered on the side of the room, "I told you he didn't walk like staff." Another survey responded, "They messed with the wrong guy badly." Richard looked around like the oxygen had vanished. His face was pale, sweat gathering along his hairline. Vanessa pressed a hand against her forehead, makeup smudging beneath her fingers. "We poured wine on the investor," she whispered, voice breaking into disbelief and fear. The fallout hit in full force. Guests backed away from them like the disaster was contagious. Some left quietly, others recorded openly. Hail Quantum's future cracked in real time, visible in every person's eyes, every panicked whisper, every alert lighting up every phone. And somewhere outside, walking calmly beneath the night sky, Jamal didn't need to turn around to know the collapse had already begun. He knew the first domino had fallen the moment he stayed silent. Morning hit Richard and Vanessa like a punishment. The kind that doesn't knock, it kicks the door in. By sunrise, every major news outlet had the story pinned to the top of their feeds. Not the deal, not the gala, not the partnership, the humiliation, the wine, the video, the caption, their faces, their names, their arrogance. The clip ran on loop everywhere. Cut, slowed down, zoomed in, comment sections bled with criticism. People dragged them like they had been waiting years for the opportunity. Headlines screamed things like corporate elites humiliate investor, gala disaster, $800, 0 cent ZM deal destroyed in minutes, and know who you're talking to. It wasn't news, it was a public execution dressed as reporting. Vanessa hadn't slept. She sat on the edge of their bed wearing the same robe she had thrown on at 3 a.m., staring at her phone through eyes that looked swollen and exhausted. Mascara smudged, hair tangled, hands shaking every time another alert buzzed. She scrolled and re-scrolled nonstop, hoping one piece of news would contradict the nightmare. None did. Richard paced the room with the same wild, desperate steps he used during board crises. But this wasn't a board crisis. This was something much worse. He ran a hand through his hair until it stood in every direction, shirt wrinkled, tied, discarded somewhere on the floor. He tried calling partners, investors, advisors. Every call went the same way. Quick answers, cold voices, and the same line delivered with the grace of a slammed door. "We're out. Don't call again." Some hung up mid-sentence, some didn't answer at all, some let his call ring until it died in silence. By 9 a.m., Hale Quantum's valuation had tanked so violently that analysts refused to speculate on recovery. By 10 a.m., 3 board members had resigned, 2 major partners pulled out, and the company's legal department issued a formal statement saying they were reviewing options, which everyone knew was corporate language for "we're preparing for impact." Vanessa pulled her knees to her chest, voice barely above a whisper. "It's over, Richard. It's actually over." She buried her face in her hands. She had attended charity galas, influencer brunches, and press conferences for years without a single hair out of place. Now, she couldn't even hold her head up. Richard froze mid-step. "We can fix this." She lifted her face slowly. "We humiliated the man who owns the partner company," she said. "The man who funded the deal. The man whose money was going to save us. You poured wine on him." "You handed it to me," Richard snapped, pointing at her, as if blame could soften the blow. Vanessa's voice cracked. "I didn't know he was the investor." "That's the point," Richard shot back. "We should have known. Someone should have known." But the truth sat in the room like smoke they couldn't clear. They hadn't cared enough to look at him. They had judged him, dismissed him, and stepped on him because the room taught them they could. It was habit, a reflex, a lifestyle. By noon, Vanessa's voice broke again. "We have to talk to him. If we don't, everything's gone." Richard's bravado deflated. He nodded weakly because he already knew the truth. Everything was gone. Announcing it, denying it, fighting it, none of it mattered. They had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. They drove across town, leaving behind a penthouse full of ringing phones and panic. The city outside looked normal. People going to work, street vendors setting up, taxis honking, sunlight bouncing off windows. But inside their car, everything felt unsteady, like the ground beneath them was tilting toward a cliff. They turned into a quiet neighborhood where the houses weren't huge but well kept. Clean lawns, soft colors, cars parked neatly. It didn't match who they were, and that alone made them nervous. They stepped out of the car, slowly, their shoulders carrying the weight of a collapsing empire. When Jamal opened the door, he didn't look angry. He didn't look triumphant. He looked calm, too calm for what they'd done to him. He wore a fresh shirt, clean clothes, nothing flashy, no security behind him, no lawyers waiting in the hall, just presence, just clarity. Vanessa spoke first. Her voice was soft, breaking on the edges. We were wrong. We treated you like nothing. Her hands trembled at her sides. Please, please let us fix this. Richard added, voice cracking despite his attempt to steady it. We lost everything. Just give us a chance to talk. Jamel stepped aside, but didn't gesture for them to come in. He didn't need to. The doorway felt like a line, one they already crossed the night before. You didn't lose everything today, he said quietly. You lost it the second you decided people's worth came from your comfort. His voice wasn't loud. It wasn't emotional. It was firm, final, grounded in truth. Oh. They stayed silent, facing the consequences of their own habits. You built a world where you believed disrespect had no cost, Jamal continued. Now you're seeing the bill. Vanessa wiped tears off her cheeks with shaky fingers. We didn't know who you were. That's the problem, Jamal answered. You didn't care who I was. Richard swallowed hard, desperation leaking through his voice. Is there anything we can do? His tone made it clear he already knew the answer. And Jamal shook his head once, slow but certain. The deal is gone, the trust is gone, and my door is closed. Silence hung in the air like a final verdict. Jamal, step back 1 inch, walk carefully. The world is smaller than you think. They left with nothing. His life moved forward. Their legacy didn't. The drive back from Jamal's house was quieter than anything Richard and Vanessa had ever experienced. Not the kind of silence that comes from peace, the kind that comes from realization, the kind that sits heavy in the air and presses against the back of your throat. They didn't speak for the first 10 minutes. The road stretched ahead with calm houses and parked cars, completely unaware that two people inside a luxury sedan were watching the remains of their world collapse in slow motion. Vanessa stared out the window with mascara-smudged eyes, barely blinking. Every now and then, she rubbed her palm against her thigh like she was trying to wipe away something she couldn't see. Her breathing kept breaking in small, uneven stutters. She wasn't built for consequences. She was built for attention, applause, curated perfection. A world where everything existed to make her comfortable, but none of the skills she mastered in that world could save her here. Richard gripped the steering wheel so tightly, his knuckles looked bone white. He wasn't crying, he wasn't shaking, he was doing something worse, thinking, really thinking. The kind of thinking a man avoids until life forces him to look in the mirror without filters or titles. His jaw kept tightening, his chest rose and fell too fast. Each red light felt like a punishment, making him sit with the truth of what they'd done. They didn't speak until they reached the main road leading back into the city. Even then, the first words didn't feel like a conversation. They felt like surrender. We're finished, Vanessa whispered, her voice hollow. Richard swallowed. We're not finished. But his tone didn't match the words. It lacked conviction. It lacked air. It sounded like a man trying to convince himself he wasn't drowning with the water already at his throat. Vanessa turned her head slowly. He meant what he said. Richard's hands tightened again. He can't just... It already did, she said. He already pulled the deal. He already froze the accounts. He already told us no. Her breath shook. You saw his face. He's not bluffing. Richard's voice cracked without warning. We humiliated him in front of 200 people. Then he added quieter and millions online. He could feel the weight of that moment replaying in the back of his mind, the wine pouring, the phones recording, the arrogant laugh he tossed into the air like it meant nothing. It didn't feel so harmless now. By the time they reached their penthouse, news vans were already parked outside, cameras pointed upward, journalists waited like vultures who smelled blood hours ago and were now circling for the final bite. Vanessa froze when she saw them. Oh God, she whispered, her voice breaking again. They're here already. Richard cursed under his breath. We'll use the garage entrance, but even the hidden entrance wouldn't save them from the reality waiting upstairs. Inside the penthouse, the silence was loud. Too loud. Phones vibrated nonstop on every surface. Missed calls, new emails, alert stacked like a digital avalanche. The home that used to feel like a palace now felt like a pressure chamber. Richard walked straight to his home office, eyes scanning screens filled with red numbers and plummeting graphs. Every drop was a knife, every percentage lost was a reminder of last night's arrogance. He had spent years building Hale Quantum into a symbol of his ambition, and now it was evaporating in front of him, undone by a moment of cruelty he couldn't take back. Vanessa sank onto the sofa, pulling her knees to her chest. Her phone buzzed relentlessly. Influencers she once laughed with now posting cryptic statements. People she considered beneath her recording reaction videos. Strangers stitching the gala clip with captions like, "This is why you treat everyone right." She couldn't escape it. Every timeline burned with her image, her voice, her smirk, her mistake. "This can't be happening," she whispered into her hands. But it was happening, and the world wasn't finished. Around noon, they finally gathered the courage to turn on the TV. Every news channel ran the same story. Not softened, not diluted, just raw footage and brutal truth. The anchor's voice didn't help. Sources now confirmed that the man humiliated at the gala was indeed the sole owner of the partner company behind the $800 million 0 cents deal. Hale Quantum Systems' actions have sparked immediate financial fallout. A panel of analysts discussed their downfall like it was a case study. What we're seeing is unprecedented. Arrogance meeting consequences. This is what happens when leadership forgets basic respect. One commentator leaned forward and said the sentence that broke Vanessa. Man with quiet power walked out, and everything followed him. She covered her mouth and sobbed. Richard sank into the armchair, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. For the first time in years, he didn't have a plan. No strategy, no spin, no speech, nothing. The collapse wasn't just financial, it was reputational. Personal, public, final. "We need to fix this," he whispered, not to Vanessa, but to the empty air. "We need another chance." But deep down, both of them knew the truth. There were no second chances here. Not after what they'd done, not after who they'd done it to, not after how the world saw it. Jamal didn't destroy them. They destroyed themselves. All he did was stop protecting them from the consequences. Jamal woke up that morning without an alarm, not because he was tense or restless, but because his body was used to starting early. It was quiet in his apartment, the kind of quiet that feels earned. He made coffee, not in a rush, not to fight stress, but simply out of habit. The world outside moved normally. Cars passed, birds chirped. A neighbor's dog barked twice. Nothing in his space reflected the chaos that had erupted across the city. He didn't turn on the news right away. He let the morning breathe. He sat at his kitchen counter and opened a notebook filled with hand-scribbled plans, dates, numbers, projections. While the world was panicking over what happened last night, Jamal was already thinking 10 steps ahead. Not about revenge, not about punishment, about direction, opportunity, where to move next. When he finally unlocked his phone, he had 137 unread messages, half from executives, some from journalists, the rest from people who had suddenly remembered his name. He didn't open a single one. Instead, he scrolled to the message from his legal team confirming the deal termination had gone through flawlessly. No complications, no delays, no loopholes. Every safeguard he put in place years ago had done exactly what he built it to do. So he set the phone down and took a slow sip of coffee. His mind wasn't on the fallout, it was on the future. What most people didn't know was that Jamal built his company from nothing. Not inherited wealth, not family connections, not privilege, just decisions, smart ones, quiet ones. He grew up in a neighborhood where people never assumed you belonged anywhere, where he learned early that silence made people underestimate you, and underestimation was leverage. When he made his first 7 figures, nobody celebrated. When he made his first 8, nobody noticed. When he hit 9, nobody believed it. And when he built the company that would eventually hold the power to crush Hale Quantum with a single call, he didn't announce it. He watched, he learned, he studied how people treated him when they thought he had nothing. Last night wasn't revenge, it was revelation. By late morning, Jamal finally turned on the news, not out of curiosity, out of acknowledgement. He wanted to see how cleanly the story had unfolded. His face wasn't plastered everywhere the way Richard and Vanessa's were. He didn't want that. He didn't need that. His name appeared quietly in lower third captions. Mystery investor identified. Silent owner behind $800.00. Deal speaks through action. But every channel echoed the same line. He warned no one. He raised no voice. He simply walked out, and the whole deal walked with him. Jamal switched off the TV. He didn't need to watch people scramble to explain something that never needed an explanation. Actions had spoken loudly enough. Around noon, he left his apartment and walked into the cool afternoon air. No bodyguards, no entourage, no tinted SUV, just him. The city didn't swarm him. Most people didn't even know his face. He preferred anonymity. It was his armor and his advantage. He walked to a small cafe he liked, the kind of place where the owner knew his order but never asked personal questions. On the way there, two strangers looked at him for a moment, like they recognized him from somewhere, and then whispered to each other. "That's him," one said softly. "He's too calm," the other murmured. Jamal didn't react. He didn't need to. He grabbed a black coffee and sat by the window. People outside hurried through their routines, none realizing they were walking past the man who had just rerouted hundreds of millions of dollars in under a minute. While he sat there, his phone buzzed again. This time, the message wasn't from executives or reporters. It was from his mentor, the only person whose opinion he valued. The message was simple. "You handled it with discipline. Proud of you." Jamal exhaled with a quiet nod. That meant more than any apology Richard or Vanessa could ever offer. Back at the penthouse, however, the air wasn't calm. It was choking. Richard sat at his desk, staring at the notification he had received a few minutes earlier. Quantum Systems is under regulatory review, not because of finances, because of conduct. He knew what that meant. Interviews, investigations, audits, documents pulled, emails examined, a reputation dismantled piece by piece. All because he couldn't control his ego for 30 seconds last night. Vanessa paced the living room in slow circles, clutching her own elbows like she was trying to hold herself together. Every mirror she passed reflected a version of herself she didn't know, a woman whose influence meant nothing outside of curated spaces. "Why didn't we see it?" she whispered. "Why didn't we pay attention?" Richard didn't answer. He couldn't. The truth was too raw. They missed the signs because they believed money made them superior. They believed appearance meant identity. They believed worth could be measured by noise. Jamal had shown them the power of quiet. By late afternoon, even their closest allies stopped responding. Lawyers advised them to stay silent. PR experts told them no statement would help. Their entire world felt like a rug that had been pulled too quickly, leaving them suspended in midair with no way to land softly. "I just wanted to stop," Vanessa whispered, sinking to the floor. Her voice cracked with exhaustion. Her hands trembled. Her breath shook. But the truth hung heavy in the room. The storm didn't start because of Jamal. The storm started because they believed they controlled the weather. And now they were standing in the rain without shelter. News of the fallout traveled faster than the truth ever could. By the time evening rolled around, conversations about Hale Quantum were happening in places Richard and Vanessa never imagined their names would be mentioned. Barbershops, university cafeterias, small offices, grocery store lines, late-night radio shows. Everyday people were discussing a disaster that had started from something so small, so stupid, so preventable, it almost felt unreal. Clips of the wine incident spread like wildfire. Edits, slow-motion breakdowns, commentaries by people who normally reviewed tech gadgets or cooking recipes. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone had a version of the story. And every version made Richard and Vanessa look worse than the one before. "Oh," someone online posted, "This is corporate karma served at room temperature." Another book. Moral of the story, treat people like humans, it's free. Thousands agreed. Richard couldn't escape it. Every time he opened his laptop, his name was tied to words he never wanted associated with him. Arrogant, reckless, entitled, finished. He tried typing responses and deleting them, draft after draft. Excuses he knew would sound weak. Apologies that felt too late. Statements that would only make the fire rage stronger. He slammed the laptop shut and ran his hands through his hair. shoulders sagging under the realization that the world wasn't waiting for him to explain. The world had already judged him. Vanessa, meanwhile, walked through their apartment like a ghost. She moved from window to window, staring at the skyline like it had answers. Every room held a piece of her old life: designer bags on shelves, framed gala photos on tables, gift boxes she'd never opened, dresses she would never open again without being whispered about. Her identity had always been built on visibility. Now visibility felt like a weapon. She sat on the edge of the dining table, staring down at her hands. They trembled not from fear of Jamal, but from fear of the mirror, the emotional mirror the entire world had placed in front of her. "Do you think he'll ever forgive us?" she asked suddenly. Richard didn't look up. No. The answer sliced through the room. He didn't say it to hurt her. He said it because the truth was lighter than pretending. Forgiveness wasn't on the table, and even if it was, it wouldn't save them. Vanessa blinked hard, eyes wet. "We weren't supposed to be these people." Richard finally raised his head. "But we are," he said quietly, "and we have been for a long time." She turned away because facing him meant facing herself. Richard stood and walked toward the window. The city lights flickered below, a world moving on without them, indifferent to their downfall. He pressed his palm to the glass and felt a strange sensation, the realization that he wasn't as powerful as he always believed. The world outside didn't care about his legacy. It didn't care about his loss. They didn't even care about his mistake. They cared about the story, and he had handed them one. In an office downtown, Hale Quantum's remaining board members sat stiffly in a conference room, avoiding eye contact with each other. The crisis had thrown them into a storm they weren't prepared to navigate. Papers were scattered across the table, emails pulled up on screens, investor withdrawals highlighted in red. The atmosphere felt like a funeral for a company still technically alive. One board member finally broke the silence. "There's no recovering from this." Another added, "Not without him." "He won't come back," a third said. "Would you?" They all knew the answer. No one would. The same time, in a small cafe across town, Jamal sat at a corner table reviewing new proposals. He had already received offers from two global tech giants who wanted to collaborate with him, offers that only appeared because the world finally realized who he was. His silence had become power. His anonymity had become leverage. His dignity had become currency. He scrolled through the proposals calmly. One looked promising, a partnership more aligned with his values, less ego-driven, more focused on innovation and long-term stability, something he wouldn't have considered yesterday but was perfect for today. His phone buzzed. Another message, this one from someone he didn't expect. It was from the chairman of Hale Quantum's board. "Mr. Rivers, we would like to meet privately. At your convenience, we respect whatever decision you choose and appreciate your time." Jamal stared at the message for 3 slow seconds, then locked his phone and slid it face down on the table. He didn't feel anger. He didn't feel satisfaction. What he felt was clarity. For the first time in years, he had absolute control over his next move. Across town, Vanessa sat curled on the couch, staring at a framed photo of her and Richard at last year's gala. She barely recognized the woman in the picture, the woman smiling effortlessly, the woman who believed she was untouchable, the woman who didn't look twice at people she thought were beneath her. Now the world was treating her with the same disregard she had shown others. Karma didn't arrive loudly. It arrived quietly in the form of consequences that mirrored their behavior. Richard walked in, holding his phone like it weighed 1,000 pounds. His voice was low. "The board wants to talk with Jamal." Vanessa wiped her eyes. "Do they think he'll save us?" Richard shook his head. "No, they think he might help them avoid deeper collapse." "Do you think he will?" she asked. Richard paused. This time he really thought about it. Then he shook his head again, slower, heavier, more certain. "No," he said, "he won't." Because Jamal wasn't driven by anger. He wasn't driven by vengeance. He was driven by principle. And once a person who lives by principle sees who you really are, there is no rebuilding that bridge. The consequences were no longer in Jamal's hands, they were in theirs. The board's message to Jamal didn't sit quietly in the background. Inside Hale Quantum's headquarters, panic rolled through the halls like smoke. People whispered in corners, typing faster than they ever had, eyes darting toward every vibration of their phones. Some employees feared layoffs, some feared investigations, others feared their resumes wouldn't matter once the company's name became radioactive. In the executive wing, the board members gathered again, this time with slightly less hope and significantly more dread. They sat stiffly around a polished marble table that suddenly felt too cold. They didn't speak at first. They just stared at their phones, waiting for a reply from the man whose silence controlled their future. One board member finally exhaled. "We should have vetted him better." Another snapped, "We did vet him. We just didn't respect him." The room fell silent. It was the closest anyone had come to telling the truth out loud. Meanwhile, Richard sat in his home office, staring at the email he'd received just minutes ago. It wasn't from Jamal or the board. It was from HR. Effective immediately, your position is under temporary review. You are requested to refrain from representing the company publicly. A polite corporate way of saying, "You're the reason this happened. We are distancing ourselves from you. Prepare for the outcome you already know is coming." His stomach folded into itself. He didn't tell Vanessa, not yet. He didn't want her to see how far the fall had already gone. But the truth pressed down on him. He wasn't in control of anything anymore. Not the company, not the narrative, not even his own role. In the living room, Vanessa sat in front of the TV, unable to turn away from the coverage. Every station had panel discussions picking apart their downfall. PR experts debated what they should have done differently. Social commentators analyzed the psychology behind their arrogance. Someone even pulled up old interview clips showing how dismissive Vanessa used to be toward servers, journalists, anyone she didn't consider important. Each clip made her shrink deeper into herself. "This isn't who I am," she whispered. But the world didn't care who she believed she was. The world cared about what it saw. And last night, it saw everything clearly. She muted the TV and rested her forehead against her knees, breathing through the ache building in her chest. Guilt wasn't something she was used to. It felt foreign, heavy, frightening. It made memories replay in her mind, moments she brushed off, people she spoke over, faces she never looked at. For the first time, she wondered how many of those moments looked like last night from the outside. Back in the cafe, Jamal remained at his window seat. The late afternoon sunlight stretched across the floor, touching the edge of his table. He flipped through a few pages in his notebook, the calm around him a stark contrast to the chaos happening in every corner of the city. He had no plans to meet the board, no intention of saving Hale Quantum, and no interest in watching Richard and Vanessa spiral further. What happened last night wasn't about revenge, it was about alignment. He didn't align with disrespect, he didn't align with arrogance, and he didn't align with people who thought power came from belittling others. His phone buzzed again. This time, a message from someone unexpected. A former employee from Hale Quantum he had never met, but had heard of, someone who quit months ago because of the toxic culture. The message read, "Thank you, a lot of us have been waiting for something to change." Jamal stared at the words, feeling something shift inside him. Not satisfaction, not pride, something quieter. Validation. Proof that his decision had rippled in ways he hadn't planned but wasn't surprised by. He'd spent years observing how companies behaved behind the scenes. Hale Quantum was rotten at the core. Their downfall wasn't caused by his action. His action simply revealed what was already broken. He put his phone away and left the cafe, walking into the sunlight with the same steady pace he carried everywhere. He didn't need to see the chaos to know it was unfolding. He didn't need to hear apologies that were too late. He understood that sometimes the universe didn't punish, it corrected. Across the city, Richard finally found the courage to tell Vanessa about the HR email. She stared at him in disbelief. "They're pushing you out?" He didn't answer immediately. He didn't need to. The look on his face told her everything. Vanessa covered her mouth, not out of shock, out of terror. Because losing the company meant losing everything she had tied her life to, her status, her stability, her identity. It was all tethered to Richard's position. "What are we going to do?" she whispered. Richard sank into a chair, exhausted. "I don't know." Vanessa wrapped her arms around herself, trembling. "I can't go back to being nobody." Her voice cracked, fragile. The sentence slipped out before she could swallow it, and it was the most honest thing she'd said in years. Being invisible terrified her more than the collapse itself. Being unseen, unimportant, forgotten. But Richard looked at her, realizing something he had never fully noticed before. She hadn't married him for who he was. She had married him for the world he created around her, a world now dissolving at the edges. In that moment, they sat together in a silence that wasn't united. It was lonely. The kind of silence shared by two people facing the truth alone, side by side. Jamal, meanwhile, walked several blocks until he reached a small community center where he often volunteered. He stepped inside and was greeted with warm smiles, not because of his wealth, not because of his influence, but because he showed up. The director handed him a folder of upcoming projects. He flipped through it with genuine interest. While the world obsessed over the drama, he quietly continued building his life, not louder, not grander, just deeper. By nightfall, Richard and Vanessa sat on opposite sides of their penthouse, staring at the city in different directions, both grieving different things, both terrified of the same truth. Tomorrow would be worse. Night didn't bring relief. It brought clarity, the painful kind. The city lights outside the penthouse windows blinked like reminders that the world was still turning, still moving, still thriving, while everything inside those walls was unraveling. Richard sat alone in his office, the weight of the day crushing him from the inside out. The silence wasn't comforting. It felt like judgment. He opened his email again, hoping the message from HR might somehow read differently the second time. It didn't. The words were still cold, still clinical, still final. He closed the laptop slowly and leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in his career, he felt powerless, truly powerless. Not because of Jamal, but because he had never built anything that made him valuable beyond his position. Everything he was depended on the title he wore. Across the hall, Vanessa sat on the floor of their walk-in closet, surrounded by clothes that no longer felt like hers. Dresses she bought for galas she would never attend again, heels she bought for events she wasn't invited to anymore, designer handbags that suddenly felt ridiculous. All the things she used to build her identity were now scattered around her like hollow trophies. She picked up a gold clutch and stared at it for a long time. She remembered the night she bought it, how confident she felt walking into a room with it tucked under her arm, how people turned their heads as she passed. Now it just looked like a reminder of a life she built on mirrors and borrowed light. Her voice was barely audible when she whispered, "Who am I without all this?" The question hung in the air, and for the first time she didn't have an answer. Meanwhile, across town, Jamal sat in his apartment sorting through folders of new proposals. Not because he had to, because he wanted to make sure the next move was intentional. He wasn't running from anything. He wasn't reacting. He was choosing. His mentor called briefly. "You're handling this with grace," the older man said. "Don't lose that. Moments like this show you who you are." Jamal nodded. "I'm not looking for revenge." "I know," the mentor replied. "That's why it hit so hard." Jamal understood what he meant. Revenge is loud. Revenge announces itself. Revenge needs everyone to witness it. But discipline? Discipline changes the world quietly. And last night, the world had watched quiet power do more damage in 1 minute than rage could do in a lifetime. After the call, Jamal stepped onto his balcony. The night air felt cool against his skin. He could see the outline of the same city that had once ignored him, now reacting to his name like it carried electricity. The irony didn't amuse him. He wasn't chasing validation. He wasn't chasing headlines. He was chasing impact. He closed his eyes for a moment and breathed in. Calm, grounded, peaceful. None of this shook him because none of this defined him. His worth didn't come from attention. His value didn't depend on applause. His identity wasn't fragile. Back in the penthouse, Vanessa finally pushed herself off the closet floor. She walked to the balcony and found Richard standing there, staring out at the city like he was trying to decode it. His shoulders looked heavier than she'd ever seen them. She stood beside him silently. The wind pushed her hair back, city lights reflected in her watery eyes. She opened her mouth, but no words came out at first. Finally, she whispered, "I miss who we were." Richard didn't look at her. "We were never those people," he said quietly. "We just thought we were." She closed her eyes because the truth hurt more than anything else. Their wealth hadn't made them strong, their status hadn't made them respected, their influence hadn't made them powerful. All it had done was hide their flaws long enough for them to believe they didn't have any. "Do you think people will forgive us?" she asked. Richard shook his head slowly. "People don't forgive arrogance. They just wait for it to fall." She covered her face with her hands. "I can't take this." He didn't offer comfort. He didn't have any to give. Downstairs, security texted them that a group of journalists had formed outside more than earlier. Microphones, cameras, live streams. They weren't leaving anytime soon. The story had grown. The narrative had twisted. Reporters wanted a statement. The public wanted a spectacle. Richard locked the balcony door behind them, not out of fear of the reporters, out of fear of being seen at all. For the first time in his life, he wanted to disappear. Meanwhile, in Jamal's quiet world, a completely different energy existed. He spent the evening reviewing blueprints for a new project, a community innovation hub he planned to fund long before last night's chaos. He'd grown up knowing what it felt like to be underestimated, overlooked, dismissed. He wanted to build something that gave people opportunity before the world told them they didn't deserve it. He poured himself a glass of water and sat at his desk, marking notes beside the architectural drawings. The irony of the timing wasn't lost on him. While one couple was being swallowed by the consequences of their pride, he was building something that would outlive him. His phone buzzed once more with another message from the board. Longer, more desperate, more polished. It used words like reconciliation, partnership, and mutual benefit. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. His silence was already an answer. The night deepened, the city lights dimmed. The world quieted in some places and buzzed wildly in others. And somewhere in that vast contrast, two different lives continued on opposite trajectories, one rising from calm purpose, the other falling under the weight of its own decisions. Tomorrow would be a turning point. But for now, the storm gathered its breath. Morning arrived with a heaviness that settled over the entire city, not the dramatic kind, the quiet, undeniable kind that signals the end of something. The sky looked softer than usual, pale light spreading across the skyline like an apology the world owed no one. In Jamal's apartment, the morning routine flowed calmly. Coffee brewed, papers sat neatly on the table. His day looked normal, peacefully normal, the kind of normal that only belonged to someone who operated from a place of discipline rather than ego. He opened his email while taking small sips of his drink. His inbox was flooded, but only one message mattered, a confirmation from his team that the new partnership contract he'd chosen was finalized. Clean, ethical, innovative, a deal built on respect rather than status. He smiled softly, almost unseen, then closed his laptop. His next chapter was already underway. At the penthouse, the morning hit differently. Cameras were still outside, more than before. Some reporters had camped out overnight. A few people live streamed from the sidewalk, narrating every movement they could catch through the parking garage entrance. The story hadn't died down. It had spread. More angles of the gala clip had surfaced, more voices weighed in, more people connected the incident to deeper issues within the company. Vanessa approached the window slowly, pulling the curtain back just enough to peek outside. Her reflection stared back. Puffy eyes, streaks of dried mascara, hair tangled from a restless night. She used to wake up glowing. Now she woke up shaken. She whispered to herself, "I can't do this another day." But life didn't pause for her comfort. Richard entered the room, holding his phone loosely, like it might slip from his hand. His face looked hollow, eyes red, posture wilted. He'd barely slept, and the little rest he did manage had been broken by nightmares of flashing cameras, collapsing stock prices, and Jamal's silent expression. "They're calling an emergency meeting," he said quietly. Vanessa blinked. "The board?" Yes. Her stomach dropped. "Are they firing you?" Richard rubbed his forehead. "They don't have to fire me." He paused, swallowing hard. "It's already over." The sentence cracked completely through her. For years, she moved through life believing nothing could touch them, that doors opened automatically, that mistakes could be spun, that apologies were optional. Suddenly, she was standing at the edge of an unfamiliar cliff, one that had no glamour, no audience, no applause. "Do you want me to come with you?" she asked. Richard shook his head. "No, this is my part." He put on a suit, but it didn't carry the same confidence it used to. He looked like a man wearing armor made of paper. Every step toward the elevator felt like walking into a courtroom where he already knew the verdict. Vanessa sat on the couch, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. She stared at the wall until her eyes blurred. The silence in the penthouse felt suffocating. It wasn't luxury anymore. It was a museum of what used to be. Richard arrived at headquarters to faces that didn't look at him the same way. People avoided eye contact. Conversations stopped when he walked by. He could feel the narrative etched into their stares. "You did this. You caused this. We're paying for your mistake." Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was ice cold. The members didn't raise their voices. They didn't scold. They didn't rage. That would have been easier. Instead, they spoke calmly, the kind of calm that comes right before a demolition. "It's time for you to step down," the chairman said simply. Richard nodded, not because he agreed, but because arguing would have been delusional. He signed the documents placed in front of him. No speeches, no bargaining, no last-minute grace, just a pen scratching against paper, ending the career he'd built his entire identity on. When he left the building, reporters swarmed like bees, sensing open honey. Microphones stretched toward him. Questions flew from every direction. He kept walking. No statements, no comments, no excuses. Silence was the only thing he had left. Back at the penthouse, Vanessa watched him re-enter with slow, defeated steps. His eyes met hers, and she knew instantly. "It's done," he said. She pressed a trembling hand over her mouth, not because she hadn't expected it, because hearing it made it real. Richard collapsed onto the sofa, and Vanessa slid down beside him. They sat there together, surrounded by the ruins of a life built on status instead of substance. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Vanessa whispered, "Where do we go from here?" Richard looked straight ahead. I don't know." Meanwhile, Jamal walked through a quiet park on the other side of the city, the morning sun warming the path ahead of him. Children played near the fountains. Joggers passed. A soft breeze carried laughter from a nearby bench. None of it felt connected to last night's chaos. Because Jamal didn't live in reaction to other people's actions, he lived in alignment with his own values. He stopped to tie his shoe and noticed a young man sitting on a bench staring at him with recognition in his eyes. The man approached slowly. "Excuse me," he said, voice nervous. Are you the guy from the video?" Jamal didn't answer immediately. He simply tilted his head, waiting. The young man swallowed. I wanted to say thank you. Most people would have yelled, fought back, made a scene, but you handled it with dignity. My dad told me last night, that's what real leadership looks like." Jamal gave him a small nod, not for praise, for acknowledgement. The young man smiled awkwardly. "Anyway, that's all. Hope you have a good day." Jamal continued walking, his steps steady, his breath even. He didn't need the world to applaud him. He didn't need validation or attention. His life spoke for itself. Across the city, Richard and Vanessa finally faced the truth. Not the public version, not the online shaming, but the deeper truth. They didn't fall because of Jamal. They fell because they believed power meant treating people like decorations in their own world. They fell because they measured worth through status instead of character. They fell because consequences don't wait for permission. As the evening sun dipped behind the buildings, casting long shadows across the city, Jamal unlocked the door to his apartment and stepped inside with the same calm he had carried all week. He didn't destroy their world, he simply stopped holding it up. Some people learn through correction, some learn through kindness, and some only learn when the ground disappears beneath their feet. The story didn't end with revenge, it ended with truth. And truth always lands clean,